Good morning, everybody. Hopefully this is working and should hopefully kick in a minute. Couple of articles. First of all, one of the comments on yesterday's video. Thank you, Julie Johnson. You reminded me that I've been meaning to look at this particular case for a good long time now. I've got that one lined up. Probably the most infamous case in the UK. Well, I'll put it this way. One of my very close friends last year I was chatting with here in a pub in Gala. He's a retired detective, and we were talking about the wrongful convictions and false confessions. And he pointed out that for him and for a lot of the officers, the most infamous or famous, if you like, is the one that we'll have a look at. Before we do, you probably noticed I am deluding myself that I'm in the Caribbean with my bright shirt on, Caribbean beach. The fact of the matter was that on Sunday morning I was chasing the gazebo that was outside, a very large gazebo, 12 foot by 12 foot, that Eunice had used the day before to have a couple of relatives around for a bit of a celebration on the gala day. And as I was given lesson the next morning, the wind was that strong, it lifted the whole gazebo up. Even though it was tied down, it broke the cables and landed in next door's garden. So anyway, this is just wishful thinking on my behalf. I couldn't possibly carry on without a mention of the fact that Liverpool FC recently won the Premiership. Both myself and Mill Billy, obviously, he's a Spurs fan, would definitely like to offer our congratulations to Liverpool. So I've got this one lined up for them. Manchester police stopped 100 Liverpool fans with flares outside Old Trafford on Sunday. Turned out they were the same flares they were wearing the last time they won the league. Anyway, I suppose we have to say, in fairness, well done to Liverpool for finally winning it. I think it's been about 30 years since they last won the league. They've come close a couple of times and never actually managed it, so well done to them. I've got another article that I want to share after this one, but let's kick off first of all with this particular article, which is entitled, well, let's bring it up. It's entitled Manchester's Vilest, the murder of Leslie Molseed. And this was written by Kate Tye just over a year ago. So let's run through it then. For 44 years, Rochdale, that's in Manchester, in Lancashire, near Manchester, Rochdale in the Pennines, was home to a murder that shook the whole of the country. And what's worse is the fact that the events that followed only seemed to get more tragic, with the arrest of the vulnerable Stefan Kitchko, a wrongful conviction, and justice that was not found for 3 entire decades. The murder. At lunchtime on the 5th of October 1975, 11-year-old Leslie Molseed was left her home on the Turf Hill estate in Rochdale to get a few bits from the shop for her mother. She never came home. Leslie, or Lel to her family, was a small, frail little girl. She suffered from a congenital heart condition which affected her health and development both physically and mentally. leaving her with the mental age of a 4-year-old. When she didn't come home, her mother began to panic and sent out a search party to find the little girl. There was no sign of her, and worse, no evidence that she even made it to the shop. So you see some police there searching. The police were called, who began an enormous search around the town of Rochdale and the adjacent M62 area. Finally, 3 days later, Leslie's body was found on a lay-by of a motorway near Wishworth Moor. She was lying face down and had been stabbed 12 times in the upper shoulders and back. None of her clothes were disturbed, and there was no signs that she had put up any sort of fight. As far as evidence went, forensics collected foreign fibres, I presume that's traces of wallpaper paste, and 379 other small objects from the body and the surrounding area. The most important bit of evidence, however, was some foreign DNA on the body, which, for the sake of politeness, I will not mention what it was exactly. I'm sure true crime buffs, you can use your imagination and connect the dots on a murder such as this. This bit of evidence would be the paramount factor in sending 2 men to prison, one guilty and one not. The prime suspect, the violent murder of 11-year-old Leslie Molseed, was one of the most callous and brutal murders of a child Greater Manchester has ever seen. When it came to finding out who was responsible for such a heinous crime, the story follows a path that unfortunately we are all too familiar with. Stefan Kitchko was a local tax clerk with moderate mental health problems. At the time of the hunt, 4 teenage girls, Maxine Buckley, Pamela Hind, Catherine Burke and Debbie Brown, came forward and accused Kitchko of indecently exposing himself to the girls the day before the murder. According to the West Yorkshire Police, why would West Yorkshire Police be involved? Because presumably where the body was found, it was just into Yorkshire rather than Lancashire. According to the West Yorkshire Police, this was enough evidence to arrest Kitchko, and they conveniently decided he was the sort of person who would fit the profile of the person likely to kill Leslie. The police chose to ignore that Kitchko had the mental age of a 7-year-old and had a clean slate with the law. Acting upon the girls' accusations, Kitchko's reclusiveness, and the fact that they found sweets and soft-core porn in the back of his car, the police arrested him on 21st of December 1975. After 3 days of intensive questioning, Kitchko confessed to the crime, believing that the investigators would prove his confession false, making him innocent and sending him home. He did not have a lawyer present and was never asked if he wanted one. His requests for his mother to be present were repeatedly denied. False confessions. Those of us who love a binge-worthy Netflix crime series will know that false confessions are a real thing, and in the past few decades, hundreds of prisoners have been exonerated on account of false confessions that were used as leading evidence in a trial. A false confession is an admission of guilt for a crime for which the confessor is not responsible, and they can happen for a number of reasons. One of them is some sort of mental disorder that makes the suspect actually believe they did it, and another is in order to protect someone else. False confessions can also occur through coercion, where a suspect is pressured or blackmailed into giving a confession, so the police can quickly close the case with a conviction and wash their hands of it. These actually take place after hours of relentless questioning without rest or aid from anyone else, and they are usually focused on vulnerable people who are easy to crack. It would be accurate to suggest that Stefan Kiczko's confession was coerced. After confessing to the police, Kiczko was charged with Leslie Molseed's murder on Christmas Eve 1975. He was sentenced to life in prison in July 1976 at Leeds Crown Court. Kiczko, who was sent to the sex offenders wing, was taunted and abused by other inmates. His mental health deteriorated drastically, and every appeal was dismissed. Reopened case. During his 17 years in prison, Kiczko developed schizophrenia and began to suffer with various delusions. Meanwhile, his mother never gave up hope of setting him free. In 1984, she contacted the human rights organization Justice, who put her in contact with solicitor Campbell Malone, who took on Kiczko's case. The case was reopened in 1991, and Malone and his team found a catalogue of mistakes and inconsistencies as they began to investigate further. The most overwhelming piece of evidence was that the material left on Leslie's body could not belong to Kiczko, due to an illness which rendered him infertile and impotent. Plus, there was an eyewitness that placed him elsewhere at the time of the murder. And remember those 4 girls that said Kiczko flashed at them? While this was going on, they all came forward and said that they made it up for, quote, a laugh. The worst part is only one of them, Pamela Hind, apologized for what they did to such an innocent and vulnerable man. His case was taken back to court in 1992, 17 years after he was first taken into custody, and his name was cleared. This case has been dubbed the worst miscarriage of justice of all time, and spurred on a full and wide-ranging inquiry into the conviction. Unfortunately, prison had taken a serious toll on Stefan Kiczko's psyche. After his release, he was committed to Prestwich Hospital, where he received treatment for his illness. In April 1992, he was allowed home, but the years of incarceration had destroyed him, and he lost interest in everything, and he rarely left his own home. Stefan Kiczko tragically died of a heart attack in October of 1993. And finally, Ronald Castry. With the release of Kiczko in 1992, the case remained cold, and for 14 years nobody heard so much as a whisper from the police with regards to Leslie's murder. That was until November of 2006, when the West Yorkshire Police arrested a comic book dealer, Ronald Castry, in connection to the murder. In what must be seen by the police as a pure stroke of luck, Castry was arrested in connection with an unrelated sex crime, whereupon a DNA sample was then found to match the sample that was left on the body of Leslie Molseed 31 years prior. With an accuracy of 1 in a billion, This piece of SH1T was found guilty in 2007 and was sentenced to life in prison. The murder of Leslie Molseed affected the lives of more than just her family and friends. This case fell victim to a string of crooked police, incompetent lawyers, scapegoating, and the terrible treatment of mental health in a way that dragged out the trauma for nearly 3 decades. The death of this little girl and the treatment and subsequent death of Stefan Kitschko will long be remembered by the community in Rochdale, as well as acting as a distinct black mark on the justice system in the country as a whole. So, as I say, that is a particularly famous case. Obviously, the fact that the retired investigator was telling me that it's one that the police, even to this day, refer back to, mistakes that were made. Now, another picture I wanted to share with you was a message that I sent to the dude. He's busy doing this Daniel Holtzclaw, looking at the Daniel Holtzclaw case, and I've got an article that I would like to share with you about it, which we'll look at very shortly. First of all, this was the message I sent him. Well, where's it gone? There we go. And I wrote, dude, after the way those 2 detectives in Oklahoma managed to get a conviction of Daniel with such whimsical evidence, would it not be a good idea to send them to Wisconsin to investigate CASA and MTSO? They'd have a field day with all the shenanigans going on there. To which he replied with lol, but no, I'm being serious, dude. I think that is it Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory? I think they would do very well up there in Wisconsin. So I was being serious when I suggested that. Okay, another article. Let's pop it up. I quite like the picture on the front here. The picture of the wolf in the sheepskin. Doesn't go any higher than that, I'm afraid. Okay, so here we go. This was from 2 years ago by Grace Winterwood. Kim Davis, advocate, investigator. Drag it down a little bit more. The public is starting to look hard at the case of Daniel Holtzclaw, and with good reason. From the very first interviews right up until his sentencing, maneuvers were made to convict this police officer. That might sound trite, because after all, don't we want rapists convicted and taken off the streets? We do, if they are actually rapists and a danger to society. The problem with this case is there was no investigative work done to find a rapist. Instead of investigating a crime to find a person, they investigated a person to try and find a crime. The focus was never on anyone other than Daniel Holtzclaw at any given time, not even when the victims blatantly described someone other than Daniel Holtzclaw as being their attacker. Kim Davis played an instrumental role in this farcical investigation and prosecution. The question we need to ask now is why. So, I'm sure we've all seen Kim Davis. Let's get rid of that so it makes that's better. So, by the time the Daniel Holtzclaw case landed on her desk, Kim Davis had already had a long career in law enforcement. Retirement was not too terribly far off, and she had a lot of experiences in her rear view. as with any law enforcement officer. Some of those were good and some weren't. Regardless of good or bad on the experience scale, each served to form her into the detective she was at the time of the Holtzclaw investigation. As people review the tape of Daniel's interview with Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, and subsequent interviews she granted to various press outlets, one thing became clear to them. Kim Davis behaved more as a victim advocate than an unbiased investigator. By her own admission, she came away from her initial interview with Jenny Liggins convinced Daniel Holtzclaw was guilty. To put this clearly, a detective decided a fellow officer was guilty strictly on the say-so of one woman with no evidence to back up the story. That isn't investigation by any stretch of the imagination. That was simply a lynching in the making. Once the wheels were set in motion after that interview, it simply became a case of finding ways to support that assumption of guilt. This wasn't easy to do, since there was no evidence against Daniel Holtzclaw. There was a video, dark and grainy, that showed the traffic stop from a distance, but did nothing to confirm Liggins' allegations of sexual assault. That was it. Nothing else existed. No fingerprints, no DNA, no incriminating SANE test results, nothing. Where an investigator would have taken a step back and reasoned, the advocate in Kim Davis wouldn't allow that. So began the all-out assault on Daniel Holtzclaw as a fellow officer, a man, and as a person. Why? Some 25 years before Kim Davis even thought of retiring, she was an officer, just like Daniel. Her name was Kim Kelly back then, and she was eager to make a difference in the world. Officer Kelly was called to a local store for a little girl that had wandered in, barefoot, needing a ride home. Kim Kelly took her shopping at Payless for 4 pairs of shoes, and then took her home. It was an honourable thing to do, a good thing to do, and it made a lasting impact on that little girl. Kim Davis was honoured for it 25 years later and donated the award money to another retired officer facing a mountain of bills from a motorcycle accident. This was also the good, honourable and decent thing to do. No one can really accuse Kim Davis of not trying to do the right thing for victims or those she perceives to be victims. Kim Davis has also faced her share of heartache and controversy. Her longtime partner, now they don't make it clear whether police partner or husband, committed suicide at the police station during a rape trial that he and Davis had investigated. So obviously must be a police partner. Okay. One cannot imagine the double blow and how this must have felt to her. Partners in public safety roles become very close, like family in a very real sense. Not only did she have to face the loss of her partner, she had to face the loss of the rape case, which was declared a mistrial. Grappling with the emotions that survivors of suicide victims always deal with must have been debilitating. However much it rankled, the mistrial was the right thing, because the grief would have certainly clouded her judgment. I am sure the victim didn't see it this way either. Which is understandable. That didn't quite make sense, but anyway, however much it rankled, the mistrial was the right thing because the grief would have certainly clouded her judgment. I'm sure the victim didn't see it this way either, which is understandable. Okay. The feeling that the system failed a rape victim had to have had a lasting effect on Davis. All in all, it is better to have a clean conviction, though, than have an unstable one, as Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory are certainly learning now. As the years passed, Kim Davis, originally Kelly, had a few encounters that bolstered her inherent dislike for the bad guys as well. In 1995, during a raid on a suspected crack house, Kim Kelly was attacked while attempting to stop one of the people trying to flee the scene. During the struggle, he headbutted her, rendering her unconscious for close to 20 minutes. If someone knocks you out in a fight, you are certainly going to harbour a grudge. If that someone is a suspected drug dealer, then that grudge will naturally follow in all interactions with the same type of people. Again, this can cloud the judgment of an investigator. Bias, whether the detective realizes it is present or not, can cause a great deal of damage in an investigation. Interaction like these over the years is what shaped Kim Davis. It appears that Kim Davis believes that the system isn't balanced between victim and offender. While that may be true, it is not a detective's job to achieve that balance, or worse yet, to unfairly tip the scales in favor of victims, putting innocent lives at risk in the process. This is exactly what happened in the case of Daniel Holtzclaw. Had Kim Davis set bias aside and just for a moment questioned what she thought she knew, this case might have had a different outcome. Had she acknowledged that there was more evidence to support Daniel Holtzclaw's version of that traffic stop than Jenny Liggins' version, this case might have had a different outcome. Unfortunately, she did neither. Kim Davis entered into this case with a blind conviction that Daniel Holtzclaw was guilty, and nothing was going to dissuade her from that. And if the evidence didn't support that conviction, they would hunt up ways to make it support it. If nobody credible, Shanice Barksdale, willingly came forward to support this conviction, they would search until they found women who could be steamrolled into making accusations. In light of the lack of actual physical evidence, they would crush Daniel Holtzclaw under the sheer number of accusers, even if it meant coaching them, as in Liggins, Morris, browbeating them, as in Rains, or disregarding what they actually said, Ellis. Throw in Rocky Gregory's mother-in-law as the lab technician. I didn't know that. Throw in Rocky Gregory's mother-in-law as the lab technician that testified the scant DNA found, and who would obviously prefer to see her son-in-law succeed rather than fail, and you have a perfect storm for wrongful conviction. Wow. Or because it never occurred to Kim Davis to question what she thought she knew, or because it never occurred to Kim Davis to question what she thought she knew. She retired as a detective, but in practice she was not. She was a victim advocate, willing to persecute and prosecute an innocent man in her misguided sense of justice. This makes her every bit as criminal as the people she swore to keep the public safe from. One has to wonder if she is worried now about Daniel Holtzclaw's wrongful conviction. After all, a lot of new evidence has come to light, and in a big way, thanks to investigative reporting done by Michelle Markin, investigative legwork done by Brian Bates, and videos by Ericosi. It's become clearer and clearer that this was not a legitimate investigation. Is it clear yet to Kim Davis? One can only hope. And obviously this is Michelle Malkin. This is Brian Bates. And I'm sorry you don't have a picture of Ericosi, but I'm sure you know who I mean. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to share with you today. Good morning, Carol. Good morning, Sharon. Yes, it was very windy on Sunday morning, certainly here in the Scottish borders when my gazebo took flight. Hence the reason I'm pretending that I'm in the Caribbean, enjoying the sunshine, as one would. Okay, well, I think that's all for today, and we'll catch you all again very soon. And just again a reminder that this Saturday, July the 4th, which I believe is something important in the Americans' calendar, is going to be the day that we speak with Dr. Richard Leo. So anyway, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you all again sometime soon. Bye for now.